Hey everyone, welcome to Dollar Games, and today I want to talk about some games that we probably never played because they've never left Japan. And honestly, learning a whole new language for a game is a bit much even for us. Today I'll be diving into some of the most amazing fan translated games out there. Games that, for reasons only known to ancient localization committees or secret business meetings, never really made it over. But luckily, thanks to the hard work of all these translators who looked at this giant wall of Japanese text and thought, I could do this, we get to enjoy them. So, if you wanted to play something awesome, weird, or just beautifully obscure, but didn't want to consult a dictionary every 5 seconds, stick around. You might just find your next favorite game. Popolocroi Monogatari is a whimsical yet heartfelt RPG set in the storybook fantasy kingdom, where you play as Prince Pietro, a wide-eyed, slightly too earnest young royal whose biggest problems should involve learning which fork to use at dinner. Instead, he finds himself thrust into a grand adventure to save his kingdom from a creeping darkness that, as tradition dictates, nobody else is equipped to handle despite being surrounded by knights and wizards. Along the way, Pietro teams up with a charming cast of allies, including a spunky forest witch and a talking white lion, who's probably wondering where it all went wrong for him. The story mixes fairy tale simplicity with deeper themes of family, courage, and responsibility, wrapped in a colorful aesthetic that hides just how much trouble Pietro's really in. Gameplay-wise, Popolocroi blends traditional turn-based combat with tactical, grid-based movements. So while Pietro might look like he belongs in a bedtime story, he'll need to carefully position himself before smacking a goblin over the head with a sword that's clearly too big for him. Characters each have unique abilities, and while battles start off as a casual skirmish, the game ramps up into a surprisingly strategic affair, because nothing says children's storybook like calculating whether your healer can survive another hit or if you're about to be wiped out by a giant mushroom. Outside of combat, players explore towns, forests, and dungeons filled with NPCs who either offer vital advice or just remind Pietro how small and inexperienced he is, which, to be fair, is accurate. What makes Popolocroi stand out is its unwavering commitment to a cozy fairy tale world that doesn't shy away from emotional moments, but still gives you plenty of chances to fight oversized insects for money. The dialogue is charming, the art is vibrant and hand-drawn, and while the story deals with dark forces threatening the kingdom, it never forgets that there is a tale about a boy growing up, and occasionally tripping over his own cape. In short, if you're looking for an RPG that feels like someone mashed Final Fantasy and Aesop's Fables together, all while politely ignoring the fact that sending a child to fight monsters is a questionable royal policy, Popolocroi Monogatari might be your next adventure. Bahamut Lagoon is a tactical RPG that drops you into a war-torn, sky-floating world where kingdoms battle for control and nobody seems to question the logistics of having entire continents casually hovering in the clouds. You play as Bu, a silent protagonist, of course, who leads a resistance force against an evil empire bent on what else? Conquering everything in sight. The story mixes political intrigue, personal betrayals, and giant dragons that could destroy everything if they weren't so busy napping or waiting to be hand-fed flowers. At its core, Bahamut Lagoon is a tale of friendship, loyalty, and what happens when an empire forgets that dragons don't take kindly to being used as war machines. Gameplay is where it really spreads its wings. Pun fully intended. The battles themselves encourage clever positioning, use of elemental attacks, and setting entire battlefields ablaze. Because sometimes the best way to deal with enemies is to turn their fortress into a barbecue. What makes this game stand out isn't just the dragons, but let's be honest, the dragons are a selling point, but how it mixes somber storytelling with over-the-top, sure, throw another potion at the dragon and see what happens gameplay. The pixel art is lush and detailed, with a surprising amount of emotion packed into the tiny sprites, because nothing says tragic betrayal like a character dramatically turning their back in 16 bits. Underneath the surface of tactical warfare and adorable but deadly dragons is a story about love, loss, and loyalty in the face of impossible odds. Though, if you're like most players, you'll spend at least some of that emotional journey wondering why your dragon insists on sitting in a poison swamp while you fight for your life. If you're in a mood for a game that lets you burn down castles with a dragon 1 minute and reflect on the heartbreak of war the next, Bahamut Lagoon is a hidden gem worth unearthing. Tales of Fantasia is a classic RPG that throws players headfirst into a sweeping tale of time travel, ancient evils, and a group of teenagers who's probably just wanting to hang out in their village without being dragged into an apocalyptic chaos. You play as Cress Albane, a sword-wielding youth whose quiet life is shattered when, surprise, his hometown is wiped off the map. From there, Cress and his ever-growing band of companions set out to stop a dark sorcerer whose hobbies include world domination and making sure everyone's childhood trauma quota is filled by lunchtime. Along the way, players explore lush forests, vast overworlds, and suspiciously well-stocked dungeons, because nothing says ancient ruin like conveniently placed healing items. The story starts small but blossoms into an epic that spans generations. So if you thought you were just going to fight some wolves and go home, think again. Unlike traditional turn-based RPGs, Tales of Fantasia pioneered the linear motion battle system, where you control Cress in real-time combat on a 2D plane while your party members act mostly on their own, depending on how much you trust AI not to spam all their MP on the first slime they see. Combat is fast-paced, blending action and strategy as you choose when to block, when to unleash flashy arts, and when to pray that your healer remembers their job. Outside the battle, there's a wealth of side content. There's cooking, because fighting demons work up an appetite, and towns full of NPCs whose main role is to remind you how bad things are going for everyone, peppered with occasional comic relief, because even the end of the world deserves a good joke. What makes Tales of Fantasia stand out, beyond its real-time combat and catchy soundtrack, thanks Motoi Sakuraba, is its ambitious story that isn't afraid to tackle themes of destiny, sacrifice, and how bad things happen when ancient wizards get bored. It's a game that starts with the usual hero's journey setup, but quickly spirals into a complex narrative involving time travel, and not the fun vacation kind, but the mess up one thing and doom humanity variety, wrapped in gorgeous 16-bit visuals and voice-acted moments. A rarity for its time, really. Tales of Fantasia offers an adventure that's equal part charming, emotional, and why is this boss 3 levels above me frustrating? If you want an RPG where swinging a sword means actually swinging a sword, and where magic isn't just for show, this is a trip worth taking. Just don't expect to get home in time for dinner. Tales of Rebirth is one of those Tales games that never officially made it out of Japan, which is a shame because it's a surprisingly deep entry in the series that combines classic Tales charm with a story that feels like it's just a little too real for a fantasy RPG. The story takes place in a world where humans, or Huma, or Gajuma, beast people, coexist, or rather try to coexist. Because as you might guess, centuries of simmering tension and discrimination don't exactly make for a peaceful society. You play as Vague, a quiet swordsman with a tragic backstory who gets reluctantly pulled into a growing conflict between the two races after his childhood friend is kidnapped. And while Vague might not be the most talkative protagonist, he makes up for it with a sword arm that could cut through metaphorical tension and a literal monster without blinking. Combat is where Tales of Rebirth shows off some of its most unique ideas. Instead of the typical run around and mash art system, it uses a 3-line battle system that forces you to think more tactically. Enemies can be on different horizontal planes, and you'll need to move between them to attack, dodge, or set up combos. It's a system that looks simple at first, until enemies decide to turn it into a chaotic game of guess which line the boss will annihilate you from next. Add to that a complex force gauge mechanic, which powers your arts and demands you to think about resource management mid-battle. And you've got a combat system that rewards skill, but isn't afraid to humble you if you start getting too button happy. And of course, it wouldn't be a Tales game without a cast of quirky party members, including a literal lion man with royal issues and a healer who definitely has no patience for your nonsense. What makes Tales of Rebirth really shine is its surprisingly serious story that tackles themes like racism, vengeance, and forgiveness, all wrapped in that signature Tales aesthetic where half the time you have deep philosophical debates and the other half you're chasing after some guy who won't stop making bad puns. The game isn't afraid to show that actions have consequences, a refreshing change from the more save the world and get a pat on the back RPGs. And while it has plenty of those classic Tales skits, you know, where the party stops mid-crisis to argue about cooking or why someone's hair looks like that, it balances those light moments with a narrative that isn't afraid to dig into tough issues. So if you're looking for a Tales game that feels like Symphonia's moodier, slightly more philosophical cousin, but still lets you smack monsters with a giant sword, Tales of Rebirth is a journey worth taking. Mother 3 is a long-awaited sequel to Earthbound, and like its predecessors, it takes the typical RPG formula, hugs it lovingly, and then quietly breaks its nose when no one's looking. Set on the peaceful Nowhere Islands, the game follows a small cast of characters whose lives are turned upside down when strange invaders known as the Pigs Masks army shows up and starts remodeling the countryside into something a little more industrial chic. While Mother 3 looks like a bright, colorful adventure filled with quirky NPCs and sentient barrels and enough weird enemies to make a biology textbook jealous, underneath its charming surface is a surprisingly emotional story about family, loss, and the consequences of unchecked progress. It's a game where you'll laugh at a talking mole 1 minute and sit in stunned silence the next. And somehow, it all works. Gameplay-wise, Mother 3 builds on Earthbound's turn-based battle system, but adds a clever and occasionally frustrating rhythm mechanic that lets you deal extra damage if you can tap the attack button in time with the music's beat. Which sounds simple until you realize half the enemies apparently enjoy syncopated jazz. And yes, your inventory is still laughably small, so you'll spend half the game deciding if you really need the 7th nut cookie. Spoiler, you don't, but you'll always keep it anyway. The game's world is broken into chapters, giving it a more structured narrative flow than previous entries in the Mother series, but don't worry, there's still plenty of weird townsfolk to interrogate, frogs that double as save points, and a monkey who might be smarter than half your party. What makes Mother 3 stand out, aside from its refusal to follow any conventional RPG logic, is how it seamlessly balances absurdity with genuine emotional depth. Yes, you'll fight ambulatory coffee cups, and yes, the dialogue is filled with moments that will make you laugh out loud, or at least snort quietly to yourself. But beneath all of that is a story with real weight. It's a game that explores heavy themes without ever feeling heavy-handed. Probably because you're too busy trying to figure out why a refrigerator just attacked you to realize that you're having a philosophical moment. Ultimately, Mother 3 isn't just a weird RPG. It's a weird RPG that sneaks in a gut punch of meaning when you least expect it. And by the time the credits roll, you'll realize that sometimes the most ridiculous journeys are the ones that stay with you the longest. Somabringer is one of those Nintendo DS RPGs that make you wonder how the handheld didn't just give up halfway through trying to run it. Developed by Monolith Soft, yes, those Monolith Soft of Xenoblade fame, Somabringer throws you into a world powered by a mysterious energy source called Soma, which sounds nice and all until monsters called visitors start popping up and treating the countryside like an all-you-can-eat buffet. You play as a specialized military group called the Farzuf Division 7, which is as fancy as it sounds, and your job is to investigate why these creatures are showing up, all while unraveling a mystery that definitely gets deeper than just bad things appear, hit them with swords. The story feels like a mix of epic fantasy and philosophical musing, with just enough what is the meaning of life and Soma sprinkled in to remind you that this is a Monolith Soft game after all. On the gameplay side, Somabringer is essentially what would happen if you took an action RPG, crammed it onto a DS cartridge, and said, you know what, let's just make it work really well. Think Diablo, but anime. You control one of several playable characters, each with their own class like swords, guns, magic, you name it, and explore beautifully rendered isometric maps, whacking monsters in real-time combat. The game also lets you customize skill trees and assign abilities, which sounds great until you realize you've accidentally made your healer a glass cannon who faints at the sight of a butterfly. And if you somehow do figure out the perfect build, you can team up with friends via local co-op. The combat is fast-paced and surprisingly smooth for a DS game, which is impressive considering how many particle effects the game throws on screen like it's trying to crash itself for fun. What makes Somabringer stand out, aside from being a DS game that punches way above its weight, is its blend of satisfying action combat with a surprisingly thoughtful story. Sure, you're here to hack and slash your way through endless waves of monsters, but in true Monolith Soft fashion, there's also moments that make you stop and think, wait, am I the good guy here? And the answer is usually yes, but it's a little complicated. And while it never saw an official localization, thanks Nintendo, the fan translation is impressively well done, letting English-speaking players actually understand what's happening instead of just pretending they totally know why that crystal is glowing ominously. So if you want an action RPG that plays like a dream, looks fantastic for its era, and gives you something to think about between your monster hunts, Somabringer is one of the best hidden gems on the DS, assuming you don't mind the occasional existential crisis mixed in with your loot drops. Boku no Natsuyatsumi 2, is less of a game in the traditional sense and more of a perfectly preserved childhood memory bottled up and ready to pour out whenever you need a dose of nostalgic bliss. You play as Boku, a 9-year-old boy sent to spend his summer vacation in a sleepy coastal village in 1975 Japan. There are no world-ending threats, no princesses to save, just fireflies to catch, beetles to battle, and the slow, endless days of summer that feel like they could last forever. Except, of course, they don't, because the game subtly reminds you that time is always moving forward. Even in this idyllic pocket of seaside nostalgia, whether you're fishing, running errands for the local kids, or just staring at the ocean while cicadas drone in the background, Boku no Natsuyasumi 2 is all about embracing the simple joys of being a kid before adulthood drags you back into the real world. Gameplay-wise, there are no urgent objectives, just a collection of daily activities that you can engage in at your own pace. Want to spend an entire afternoon hunting for rare bugs? Go for it. Feel like racing your new friends to prove you're the fastest kid on the block? They're game. Maybe you just want to lay in the grass, watch the clouds, and let time slip away while the soundtrack gently reminds you that you'll never be this young again. While Boku's adventures are small scale, they feel big in the way that childhood makes everything seem larger than life. That said, Boku does have to navigate the social landscape of his temporary home. His interactions with villagers and his extended family will shape how he remembers his summer, whether as a carefree adventure or a bittersweet farewell. What makes Boku no Natsuyasumi 2 so special is how it captures this fleeting magic of childhood without ever feeling artificial. There's no grand twist, no looming disaster, just the gentle passage of time and the realization that every sunset brings you one step closer to the end of summer. The game doesn't force you to feel nostalgic, but it knows that you will, because everyone remembers what it's like to be young, to have endless days stretched ahead of you, and to not yet understand that those days don't actually last forever. It's a game that lets you be a kid again, even if only for a little while. And when the summer finally ends, you'll walk away with the same feeling Boku does, grateful for the memories, but always wishing you could go back and do it all over again. And that's the list, a handful of incredible games that only exist in English because some fans decided that sleep was optional. If you've played any of these, or have played any fan translations I probably should have mentioned, please drop it in the comments, because honestly, my backlog isn't intimidating enough, so please share. As always, if you like this video, please like and subscribe, and maybe share this with a friend who needs a reason to emulate a game from 1996. Thanks for watching, and remember, if life doesn't give you official translations, thank the fan translators, and find ways to support them. See you next time.